Last week here on the porch, we introduced you to, what was it, Amy? The fermented room temperature foot juice, also known as wine. This week, we're going to do the same thing with our impressions. We're going to break them down scientifically to examine whether or not they're worth pursuing and thinking about. Welcome to our discussion of Stoicism, courtesy of A Handbook for New Stoics, a book by who?
Massimo Paglucci and Gregory Lopez.
I make her say the name because I screw it up every single time, but that's part of what we do here at Painted Porch Strategies. We gather together, have discussions over Stoicism, but we're a company that's founded on these guiding principles to help your company or you live the best life possible. I'm Rob Hunter. This is Amy Yak. Over there is Sierra Ram, Cantrell in Utah at the moment.
This is my view at my campsite.
Ooh.
Wow.
That's pretty nice.
Pretty majestic. Well, I'm in this setting that is, it's beautiful, but as I learn about the science of how these rocks were made and the erosion and the water and just over like little bits over thousands upon millions of years, it's a great backdrop to this, like looking at things scientifically. Like you can look at things on a personal level, and then you can look like step way back and look at like the cosmic level.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. Backdrop. Fun. I love it.
But also cosmic level, kind of what they want us to do. It's one of the big Stoic teachings, particularly Marcus Aurelius, who wants you to say, okay, zoom out, right? So you have a problem, you have an impression, zoom out on that impression and really break it down and figure out if this is a judgment that's worth having, an impression that's worth having, or if it's worth just thinking about it in its raw form and then either moving on or thinking about something from a different way. So they have a quote in here from Marcus Aurelius, which I thought was really interesting and an extension of last week to break down our impressions. And I kind of equate it this way, broke it down into three parts. There's the questions to root it down, to break down your impression. And then once you do that, so I'll give you an example. Someone criticized me on Twitter the other day.
A person on Twitter.
That's how I broke this down. I said, okay, so what is this really? This really is a stranger, another person who's part of our human team, who typed on his box or computer a message that gets conveyed to me via the cosmos, the internet. Mm-hmm. That's it. Now I get to decide what to do with that, whatever the message is. Then I put it to the virtue test, like Marcus Aurelius. So the virtues, the four that he talks about in this quote here, if I can find them, do you have them in front of you? Gentleness, courage, truth, good faith, simplicity, self-help, or what? Those are not the four virtues, obviously, because there's like 6 of them. Mm-hmm. But they're in here and I wrote them down. I'll find them in a moment. Then you decide whether or not this impression, this thing came from God. So is it part of the universe like Sierra sitting in Utah? Or is this from another human being who, again, as the Stoics believe, we're all meant to collaborate like we're doing right here on the porch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so often we let our impressions get the better of us, mm-hmm. right? Those impressions, those first impressions, those judgments that we make, they sometimes can trip us up and cause us to react a certain way, probably often in an undesirable way. And really this we've all been there. We've all been like, oh, shouldn't have said that, shouldn't have done that. Got a little regret there. And that's what they want us to do, is to take it and examine it for what it is, really break it down and be able to separate the impression, the emotion from what actually happened, from the event. Sierra, I know you talk about this a lot, even in your program when you introduce Stoicism, and it's the ABCDs, right? You're really breaking it down into the event versus the circumstance versus the action versus the belief versus the consequence or circumstances of it. And then whether or not you actually want to decide to react a certain way. And that's what they want us to do here, is really break it down. I loved in the quote, he's got away with words, let me tell you. Now, granted, it's the translators too that help him, I'm sure, translating it from ancient Greek. But he says, nothing so emancipates the mind as the power of scientifically testing everything that comes into our life. And we've talked about this several times before. I think even a couple weeks ago, I feel like it was Seneca who said, hold a mirror up to your impressions, look at it, examine it, question it. What is it really? And how long, thinking that zoom out, how long is this really going to last? Is this really a big deal or not? Be it in my moment, in my week, in my month, in my lifetime, in the lifetime of everybody else around me. It's not to oversimplify and not to downplay your situation, but it's kind of like taking a first world problem view of it a little bit and be like, how big a deal is this really? And do I, in fact, want to behave a certain way? And the way you can examine that is by, to your exact point, Lauren, by breaking it down into its core elements, like we did last week with stuff and things that we desire, but also this week in our reactions and even the aversions, the things that we want to avoid, but being very clear about what those are. Sarah, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I love that they remind us the Stoic curriculum hinges on the study of 3 subject matters: physics, logic, and ethics. So you think about physics and logic, that's definitely scientific. And then you've got ethics, which is kind of like your own belief system. You could say your spiritual, your religious beliefs, but your ethics about how to be a good and virtuous person. So it's the balance of those 3. And I have to say, I think the physics and logic, that piece really appeals to me personally, helping to balance out my emotional side, because I definitely have an emotional side. So it's a good balance. It's a good reminder when I look at it through that lens of facts and reason. I even underlined it in the chapter several times, facts and reason. It just does help give me some more perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a huge part of the Stoicism, right? Take that perspective. And what I really love, I think my favorite part about Stoicism is the collaborative idea that human beings are meant to work together. Because I'll give you an example of this week. So Amy and I went to the grocery store a few days ago. And as we were leaving, there's a UPS store, and Amy wanted to check her mail at the UPS store. And there was a man sitting out there. And he was clearly homeless. And I have an aversion to homeless people because I don't want to be asked for money or food, because I don't know what they're going to use that money or food for. But I'm in the car and I'm watching Amy walk to the mailbox, and she's engaging in conversation with this gentleman. And circle back around, Amy agreed to go buy him some food and a beer. So we went and we got it, and I was a little bit annoyed. I said, why are we doing this? Then we drove back to the man, brought him his food, and he was so incredibly grateful that we did that for him. And he was struggling, he couldn't walk. He's like, his feet were swollen. And I realized in that moment, my impression was 100% wrong. So in thinking about this Stoic lesson and applying it to that, if I saw my impression and I knew it was an impression of aversion. So why did I have that impression? Well, because I've had experiences being asked, but those experiences in the past, being asked for money, begged for money, have nothing to do with this moment right now. And to make that go back to the collaboration piece, if the thing that we did helped that man in a moment, aren't we playing on the same team, at least in a little way? And I give Amy credit for that because I had nothing to do with it. So that's the reason I'm telling that story, not to brag about what we did. I'm bragging about what Amy did and how it helped me so aptly in this lesson.
Mm-hmm.
So good job.
Well, thank you.
Very nice.
Mm-hmm. And
well, I like that as you decomposed it down to taking in that whole situation, which is exactly what they're asking us to do with aversions or things that you kind of don't like or avoid or things that you're trying to rid yourself of. So you went back to that original step and said, you know, I have an aversion to this because I had a negative experience in the past. And then you decided to take in that whole situation on a social cosmic level. And then you thought about the step 3, the virtues you can exercise in this situation. And you found that if you just kind of kept an open mind, that this situation was different. But if you'd let your aversion get in the way of that, you might have missed that opportunity.
Exactly.
So what did you guys have? Because that's the exercise. They sort of like last week, they wanted us to break down wine into room temperature fermented foot juice. Because as we know, wine used to be crushed with people's feet before it was able to be processed. So what did you guys come up with? Or what situations compelled you to use this lesson?
Yeah, so
Well,
go ahead, Sierra.
So as you know, we're on a road trip, and there's a lot of things that are kind of unplanned, which I usually have an aversion to unplanned things or wasted time or, you know, things like that. And then to boot, we have other, not just the 3 of us, but we have other people in the mix. We had, you know, my sister-in-law and my niece with us. We're meeting up with some friends at the campground here. So there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of things like that we even planned. The plans changed, or, you know, the plans just completely went out the window. And I really felt myself like very averse to it. I was like, you know, my mind was going crazy. How I broke it down was that other people have different operation and different agendas or non-agendas, and the world is not in my control. So that was basically the big picture ways that I broke it down in order to let go of that idea that somehow these plans that were changing, that I didn't let it bother me any longer. The world is not within my control, but what can I control is how I shifted. And this also is just perfect because we've been working on Amy's upcoming course, which is Extraordinary Teams. And in her course, she talks about the victim role. And I realized how easy it was for me to shift into that victim role of like, oh, this isn't what I wanted to do. Why is this happening to me? And then I had to stop and be like, this isn't really about me, and it's not in my control. So I need to just let go of that idea of the plan and just roll with what happened.
That's wonderful. Sometimes it's very hard, especially if you are someone who likes to have a schedule and, okay, what's happening next and where are we going after that? So that's wonderful that you embraced it, and also being open to the possibility of spontaneity, of the unplanned, right? Who knows what will happen, even though it doesn't feel like maybe we're doing anything right now. Sometimes in those moments of not doing, things emerge, you know, experiences happen that otherwise wouldn't have if you would have kept a very tight leash on the activities or the agenda or, you know, the destination. So that's awesome. Great job. I'm going to have you do what you always tell me to do. Lift up your arm, bend it back, and give yourself a little pat. That's a big change. That's a big one.
When the teacher becomes the student.
So true. So true. I'm always learning. I never claim to be perfect. I learn through my mistakes. It's opportunities.
Absolutely. So for me, because what they wanted us to do was take the original trigger or the impression that we had the week before and bring it over. So the one that I had from the week before was that when I'm tired or worn out or stressed or anxious, like that's the trigger that I then say, oh, I could really use a glass of foot wine, right? Foot juice. So from that, exactly. So to help break it down, what I did is I just asked myself a series of questions. I said, why am I feeling stressed out in this moment? is this situation in my complete control? One of our 101 dichotomy of control. What's the real impact here to feeling this way? As well as how big is the problem really from the grand scheme of my day, that hour, my week, etc. And then specifically, I said, because so often I've noticed that we all, and me especially, do this, is that we ruminate. We get in this like vicious cycle of anxiety or frustration, or whatever the emotion is, whatever your emotion du jour is that you tend to spin in. You just spin and spin and spin, and you spin and spin and spin. You can ask all these questions and you could justify it till the cows come home. But ultimately, the only way you're going to get through it is by asking, is there a solution? Because that's the only thing that's really going to truly help you move through it. You can break it down, but ultimately you have to say, how am I going to get past this? What is the solution that's going to allow me to move forward?
It's a great point.
Yeah.
And this is what I look at it. As we were talking here, there's a lot going on in the world right now with personal development, and there has been for quite a while. This is the original personal development. It's really what Stoicism is, because it gives you tools and techniques to handle life. Doesn't always have to be perfect, but so long as you're striving to improve. And now we're getting into the nitty gritty as we're 45 weeks into this. Those little things that you just talked about, Amy, the big things, the big impressions that you have, you wonder why you have them. This is you battling your survival brain. Your survival brain gives you these impressions and these judgments, something that Sierra and I both talk about in our programs here at Painted Porch Strategies. And they're not accurate anymore. Sure, 200,000 years ago, when humans are around, like, can I eat this? What is that animal? Is it going to eat me? Do I have to run from it? Do I have to climb this tree? Those are all still instinctual, because as we've moved on and evolved and survived, those ancient instincts are still there, those animal instincts. But we don't live in that world anymore. We mostly have houses and cars. So the survival is a little bit different than it used to be. It's so convenient to go to the grocery store and get food when you want it, provided you have the money to do so, to get a job, to be able to support that. So the modern conveniences have made life safer than it's ever been. Sure, it's not 100% true, but most of us don't face life or death situations every day, but our brain thinks we're facing life or death situations every single day. And what Stoicism reminds us is really that's that first modern society that we think of, right? I mean, there were a couple before that, but this first written language that translates, that was easy for the knowledge to exist thousands of years later, that we are here in this moment to be able to move past our survival brain in most instances.
Amen.
So on that note, we are, again, Painted Porch Strategies. We are a company founded, based in the Stoic principles, but our design is to help your team, to help you teach some of these lessons, apply them to mindfulness, communication, and teamwork. So we would love to work with you. You can find us at paintedporchstrategies.com. Drop us a note, say hi. And of course, we do these lessons every single week. We've only got a few more to go, but if this is the first one you're joining us with, the second one, there's plenty more. Go back to week 1 and you can follow along with us in a handbook for new Stoics. For Sierra, for Amy, I'm Rob. We'll see you next week.